My father stopped talking to me for 12 years. Then one letter arrived. I still remember the exact moment my father stopped talking to me. It wasn't loud. There wasn't some dramatic argument where people screamed and slammed doors. In fact, the moment itself was strangely quiet, which somehow made it hurt even more. I was 22 years old at the time, standing in the kitchen of the house I had grown up in. The house smelled like coffee and old wood, the way it always had in the mornings. My father was sitting at the table, reading the newspaper. That part of the memory is crystal clear. He always read the newspaper the same way. Coffee cup on the right, folded, pages stacked neatly on the left, reading glasses, low honors, apple nearing that coming, and said, "Look." I carried it with me for the next 12 years. My name is Elena Carter, and before that morning, my father had been the most important person in my life. That might sound strange to some people, but if you had grown up in our house, you would understand. My mother died when I was 9. Cancer at fast and cruel. One year she was healthy, laughing loudly in the kitchen while making pancakes on Sunday mornings. The next year she was gone. After that was just the two of us. My father wasn't the emotional type. He never sighed "I love you" very often. He wasn't the kind of man who hugged people in public or talked about feelings, but he showed love in quieter ways. He packed my lunch every morning before school. He never missed one of my soccer games, even when he worked 12-hour shifts at the construction company. When I was 13 and broke my arm falling off a bike, he slept in a chair beside my hospital bed all night. Not once did he complain. Not once did he leave. That was my father, a man who spoke very little, but did everything, and for most of my life, I believed we understood each other perfectly until the day we didn't. That morning in the kitchen started with something small, at least it seemed small at the time. "I'm moving to Chicago," I sighed. I had practiced those words for weeks, rehearsed them in my head during long drives, whispered them to myself in the mirror. But the moment they finally came out, they sounded different, sharper, more final. My father didn't respond immediately. He slowly folded the newspaper, took a sip of his coffee, then looked up at me. "Why?" He asked, just one word, but it carried weight. I took a breath. "Because I got the job." He stared at me for a long moment. "What job?" "The architecture firm I told you about." Still silence. "You applied for that?" he asked. "Yes." "When?" "Oh, few months ago." The way his jaw tightened told me everything. "You didn't tell me." "I wanted to wait until I knew." "Until you knew what?" he asked. "Until they hired me." The tension in the room started to grow. It felt like the air itself was getting heavier. "You're leaving," he said slowly. "Yes." "For Chicago?" "Yes." "For a job?" "Yes." Another long silence filled the kitchen. Then he leaned back in his chair. "You're not going." For a moment I thought I had heard him wrong. "What?" "You're not going," he repeated calmly. Something inside my chest tightened. "Dad, I already accepted the offer." His eyes hardened. "You didn't ask me." "I'm 22," I said. The moment those words left my mouth, I knew they had landed badly. Very badly. His expression changed. Not anger exactly. Something deeper, something wounded. "You think that means you don't need family anymore?" "That's not what I said." "You're leaving this house," he said. "Yes." "You're leaving this town?" "Yes." "And you think that's just normal?" I tried to stay calm. "It's an opportunity." His voice became colder. "Opportunities are everywhere. Not like this one." "And what happens when that job disappears?" he asked. "It won't." "You think you know everything," he said. I felt frustration building inside me. "No," I said. "I just know I need to try." That's when he stood up, slowly, deliberately, and for the first time in my life, I saw disappointment in my father's eyes. Not anger, not rage. Disappointment. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Maybe," I answered, "but it's my mistake to make." Those words were the final crack in something fragile between us. He looked at me for a long time, long enough that the ticking clock on the kitchen wall suddenly felt incredibly loud. Then he said something I never expected to hear. "If you walk out that door," he said quietly, Don't expect me to wait for you to come back. The words felt like ice in my chest. Dad, you've made your decision, he continued. So make it. I stood there frozen. I had expected an argument. Maybe yelling. Maybe even anger, but not this. Not this cold distance. Are you serious? I asked. He didn't answer. He simply picked up the newspaper again, like the conversation had already ended. Like I had already left. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. He didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't move. And that's when something inside me broke too. I grabbed my bag from the counter, walked toward the front door. My heart pounded harder with every step. Part of me expected him to stop me, to say something, anything, but he did in single quotes T. My hand touched the door handle, still nothing, so I opened the door, stepped outside, and walked away. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the last time my father would speak to me for 12 years. 12 years of silence. 12 years of birthdays without phone calls. 12 years of holidays where I wondered if he was sitting alone in the same kitchen. 12 years where the distance between us grew so large that I started to believe it might never close again, until the day the letter arrived, and when I opened the envelope, everything I thought I knew about those 12 silent years changed forever. When I arrived in Chicago, I told myself I wasn't looking back. That was the promise I made during the long drive from my hometown to the city. 8 hours on the highway. 8 hours of silence. 8 hours trying not to think about the last thing my father had said. If you walk out that door, don't expect me to wait for you to come back. At the time, I told myself he didn't mean it. He was just angry. He would calm down, he would cool, that's what fathers do, right? But days passed, then weeks, then months, and the phone never rang. Chicago was louder than any place I had ever lived. The first thing I noticed was the constant noise. Cars, sirens, people walking quickly in every direction. My apartment was small, barely larger than a studio. One narrow window looked out onto another building, so close I could almost see inside someone else's kitchen. But I loved it. Not because it was perfect, because it was mine. My first job at the architecture firm started 2 days after I arrived. The building itself was enormous. Glass walls reflecting the skyline. Sunlight bouncing off every surface. When I walked in that first morning, I felt like a small fish in a very big ocean. Everyone seemed confident, everyone seemed experienced, everyone looked like they already belonged there. Except me. My desk was near the back of the office. Not a corner office, not even near the windows, just a simple workspace with a computer, a drafting tablet, and a stack of project folders. But when I sat down that first day, something eyed me. Sparks was what I had worked for. Years of studying, late nights finishing design models, sketchbooks filled with ideas that no one had ever seen. Now I was finally in a place where those ideas might actually matter. The work was intense. Long hours, tight deadlines. But I loved every second of it. There's something magical about seeing a building first as a drawing, then slowly watching it become real. Steel beams, concrete foundations, glass panels, catching sunlight. It felt like shaping the future with lines on paper. For the first few weeks, I was too busy to think about anything else. Too busy to think about my father. Too busy to think about home. But silence has a strange way of growing louder when life slows down. The first time I noticed it was my birthday. I turned 23 in Chicago. A few co-workers took me out for drinks after work. They brought a small cake. Everyone sang. I smiled, I laughed, but when I got home later that night, the apartment felt too quiet. I sat on the couch, phone in my hand, waiting just in case. Midnight passed, then 1 in the morning, then 2. The phone never rang. That was the first time I realized the silence might not end anytime soon. Years began to move quickly after that. My career grew slowly at first, then faster by the time I was 26. I had been promoted to project designer at 28. I was leading small teams on commercial projects. Chicago had become my city, my friends, my life. From the outside, everything looked successful, but there were moments when something still felt incomplete. Moments when the silence returned. Every Christmas. I told myself the same thing. Maybe this year he'll call every Father's Day. I stared at my phone longer than usual. Maybe this year he'll forgive me, but 12 years is a long time for silence to grow roots, eventually. The hope started fading, not all at once, slowly like a candle burning lower every year. Still, I couldn't bring myself to fully let go. Once or twice. I even drove back to my hometown, not to see him. Just to drive past the house, the same white house with the wooden porch, the same oak tree in the front yard, the same kitchen window. Where I had stood that morning 12 years ago. Sometimes the lights were on, sometimes they weren't. But I never knocked on the door. Part of me wanted to, another part of me was afraid of what might happen if I did. Or worse, what might not happen. Life continued moving forward. I turned 30, then 30-2, the architecture firm expanded. And I eventually became one of the youngest senior designers in the company. My name started appearing on project boards, buildings I helped design began appearing across the city skyline. Friends congratulated me, my boss trusted me, clients respected me. But there was always one person who never saw any of it, my father. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning changed everything. It started like any other day. Alarm at 6:30, coffee brewing in the kitchen. Chicago. Sunlight filtering through the apartment window. I grabbed my bag and stepped outside to check the mail before leaving for work. Most days it was the same routine: bills, advertisements, occasional packages. Nothing exciting. But that morning there was something different in the mailbox. A single envelope, old-fashioned or cream-colored paper, handwritten address. For a moment, I thought it might be a wedding invitation or some kind of formal notice, but inside the handwriting, and my heart stopped, because I recognized it instantly, even after 12 years. My father's handwriting hadn't changed. The same careful letters, the same slightly slanted lines, my name written across the envelope, Elena Carter. My hands suddenly felt cold. I stood there on the sidewalk staring at the envelope, like it might disappear if I blinked. For 12 years. Nothing, not a phone call, not a message, not a single word, and now this, letter. My first instinct was not excitement, it was fear, because when silence lasts that long, any break in it feels dangerous. I slowly turned the envelope over. No return address, just a stamp, and that familiar handwriting. Cars passed behind me. Someone walked their dog across the street. The city kept moving, but in that moment, it felt like time had stopped. Part of me wanted to open the letter immediately, right there on the sidewalk. But another part of me hesitated, because once I read whatever was inside that envelope, there would be no going back to the silence I had lived with for 12 years, and something deep inside me whispered a terrifying possibility. What if this letter wasn't an apology? What if it was a forgiveness? What if it was something else entirely? Something I wasn't ready to face. I stared at the envelope for a long time, then slowly slipped it into my bag and walked to work. But all day long, I couldn't focus. Meetings blurred together, emails piled up unanswered every few minutes. My mind drifted back to the letter waiting in my bag, waiting to be opened, waiting to change something I had believed was permanent. By the time the workday ended, my hands were shaking again, the same way they had 12 years earlier when I walked out of my father's house. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the envelope resting on the table in front of me, and after 12 years of silence, I finally opened it. But the words inside that letter were not what I expected, not even close. And the truth my father revealed in those pages would force me to question everything I thought I knew about why he stopped talking to me. For a long time, I just stared at the envelope. It sat there on the small kitchen table in my apartment, like it carried its own gravity. The room was quiet, too. Quiet, the same kind of quiet that had followed me for 12 years. Except this time, the silence wasn't empty, it was full of questions, full of possibilities, full of fear. My fingers rested on the edge of the paper, but I didn't open it right away. Because something strange happens when you've lived with silence for that long. You start to build stories around it. You imagine the reasons. You convince yourself you understand what happened. And after 12 years, those explanations become solid, permanent, safe, but a letter like this had the power to destroy all of that in seconds. I took a slow breath, then carefully slid my finger under the flap. The paper tore softly. My heart was beating faster now. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. I unfolded it slowly, and there it was, my father's handwriting, the same steady lines I remembered from old grocery lists and birthday cards when I was a child. For a moment my eyes blurred. I hadn't realized how much I missed something as simple as seeing his handwriting. I forced myself to focus and began reading. Elena, if you're reading this, it means I finally gathered the courage to send it. I've written this letter 100 times over the last 12 years. Every time I finished it, I folded it, put it in an envelope, and then never mailed it. I kept telling myself I would send it tomorrow. Tomorrow turned into weeks. Weeks turned into years, and before I knew it, 12 years had passed. My chest tightened. I kept reading. You probably believe I stopped talking to you because you left, because you moved to Chicago, because you chose your career over this town. That's the story I allowed you to believe, and I know how cruel that must have felt. I paused. My mind was already spinning, because that had always been the explanation in my head. He was angry. I left, so he shut me out. Simple, painful, but simple. I kept reading. But the truth is more complicated than that, and the truth is something I was too ashamed to tell you. I leaned forward slightly, my hands gripping the paper. 3 months before you told me you were leaving for Chicago, I received a diagnosis: pancreatic cancer. The doctor said it was aggressive. He said treatment might buy time, but the odds were not good. The room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls had moved closer. My eyes rushed down the page. I didn't tell you because you had just graduated. You were excited about your future. You had dreams bigger than this town. And I knew if you found out, you would stay. You would give up everything you worked for just to sit beside me in a hospital room. My throat tightened painfully. But I didn't want that life for you, your mother, and I always dreamed you would go further than we ever could. When you told me about Chicago that morning in the kitchen, I realized something. If I supported your decision, you might hesitate. You might feel guilty about leaving, so I did the only thing I thought would guarantee. You walked out that door. My breathing had become shallow, slow, heavy. You probably hated me for what I said that day, and honestly, you had every right to. But the moment you closed that door, I knew something important. You were going to be okay, because you were brave enough to leave. My hands started trembling again. Not from anger, from something deeper, something painful. The letter continued. The treatments lasted longer than the doctors expected. I fought harder than they thought I could. Years passed, and somehow, the cancer went into remission. But by the time I realized I might survive, too much time had already passed. I felt something break open inside my chest. He had survived all those years alive, just silent. I thought about calling you many times, especially when I saw your name appear in architecture magazines. Yes, Elena, I've been following your work. You probably didn't know that, but every time a building with your name attached appeared in an article, I clipped them. Tears began sliding quietly down my face. I told myself I would call when the right moment came, but the longer I waited, the harder it became, because every year that passed made me feel like I had already lost you. The last paragraph sat alone at the bottom of the page. I don't know if this letter will bring anger or forgiveness, maybe both, but I needed you to know the truth. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. If you ever decide you want to see an old man again, I'll be sitting on the same porch where you left 12 years ago. Dad. I sat there in complete silence, the letter resting in my hands. 12 years. 12 years of believing my father had rejected me. 12 years of thinking he chose silence over reconciliation. And now, I knew the truth. The silence hadn't been punishment, it had been sacrifice. He had pushed me away because he believed it was the only way to protect my future, and suddenly every memory from that morning in the kitchen looked different. The way he folded the newspaper, the way he avoided looking at me. The way his voice sounded heavier than usual. He hadn't been angry, he had been scared. Terrified of becoming a burden. Terrified of destroying the dreams my mother and he had always hoped I would chase. I looked down at the final line again. I'll be sitting on the same porch. The same porch, the same house. 12 years later, my chest tightened with something powerful, regret, loved, hope, and a sudden realization. All this time I believed the silence between us was permanent, but now, for the first time in 12 years, there was a dawn and timer. I'd a choice, I'd alive. I had built, keep the distance that had defined more than a decade of my life, or I could get in my car, drive 8 hours back to the place where everything started, and see the man who had been waiting on that porch the entire time. I wiped the tears from my face, folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope, because something inside me had already made the decision. And the next morning, I was going home. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. The letter stayed on the table in front of me. And every time I looked at it, my chest tightened again. It felt impossible that a few sheets of paper could change 12 years of my life so completely, but they had. For 12 years I believed a story that wasn't true. For 12 years. I believed my father had chosen silence over me, and now I knew that silence had been something else entirely. Sacrifice, fear. Love. Expressed in the most painful way possible. Around 3 in the morning I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet Chicago street below. The city was asleep, street lights painted long golden lines across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed and slowly faded. For years, this city had been my home. It had given me everything I once dreamed about, my career, my independence, my identity. But in that moment, standing there with my father's letter still in my hands, I realized something important. Some parts of your life never stop belonging to the place where they began. And for me, that place was 8 hours away. The decision didn't feel dramatic, it didn't feel like some huge cinematic moment. It felt quiet, certain, like something that had already been decided. Somewhere deep inside me, long before that letter arrived. By sunrise I had packed a small bag. I called the office and told them I needed a few days off. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, like it was carrying something too heavy to explain over the phone. Then, I grabbed my keys and started the drive home. The highway leaving Chicago was familiar. I had driven it once before, 12 years earlier, but that drive had been different. That time I was leaving something behind. This time I was going back. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, cutting through fields, small towns, and long quiet landscapes. Hour after hour passed. My mind replayed memories I hadn't thought about in years. The kitchen table, the newspaper, the way my father had avoided looking at me that morning. Also signs I had misunderstood, and slowly, painfully, I began to see the truth hiding inside those memories. He hadn't been pushing me away, he had been letting me go. Somewhere around the 6th hour of the drive, the sky started turning orange as the sun moved lower in the afternoon. I felt nervous. Not the kind of nervous you feel before a job interview or a big presentation. This was something deeper, because I didn't know what I would find when I arrived. 12 years is a long time. People change, lives move forward. And there was still a part of me that wondered if I was already too late. The familiar road leading into my hometown appeared just before sunset. The same small gas station on the corner, the same grocery store with the faded sign, the same quiet streets lined with trees that seemed smaller than I remembered. My heart was beating faster now. Every turn brought me closer to the place where my entire childhood had happened, closer to the house I hadn't stepped inside for 12 years, and closer to the man sitting on that porch. When I finally turned onto Maple Avenue, I had to slow down. The street looked almost exactly the same. The same sidewalks, the The same houses. The same oak tree standing in front of the White House at the end of the block, my house, or at least the house that used to be my car rolled slowly toward it, and then I saw him, sitting on the porch. Exactly like he had written in the letter, my father. He looked older. Of course. 12 years had placed their marks on him. His hair was almost completely grey. Now his shoulders seemed slightly smaller than I remembered, but there was no mistaking him. He was sitting in the same wooden chair he always used, looking out at the street like he had been doing that every evening for years. Waiting. I parked the car at the curb but didn't get out immediately. For a moment I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, because after 12 years of silence, I had no idea what the first words should be. How do you begin a conversation that has been waiting over a decade? How do you cross a distance like that? But then something happened. My father looked up. Maybe he heard the car. Maybe something inside him just knew. Our eyes met across the yard, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly, he stood up. I opened the car door. My legs felt strangely steady as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Every step toward the porch felt heavier than the last. He didn't walk toward me. He simply stood there waiting, the same way he had been waiting all those evenings. When I reached the bottom of the porch steps, I stopped. We were only a few feet apart now, but 12 years of silence stood between us. His eyes studied my face carefully, like he was trying to memorize it again. You got my letter? He said softly. His voice sounded older, but it was still the same voice I had grown up hearing. I nodded, double quotes, yes. For a moment neither of us spoke again. Then I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I stepped forward and hugged him. The moment my arms wrapped around him, something inside me finally broke open. All the anger, all the confusion, all the years of wondering why'd they all collapsed at once. My father hugged me back, not tightly, not dramatically, just firmly, like he was making sure I was really there. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice cracked slightly on the last word. I pulled back and looked at him. You should have told me. I know, he said. I thought I was protecting you. You were, I said quietly, but you were also hurting yourself. He nodded slowly. I figured that out eventually. We sat down on the porch together, the same porch where he had been sitting for 12 years. The sun was almost gone now, and the sky was turning deep shades of purple and gold. For a while we just talked, not about the past right away, not about the silence, just small things, my work, his garden, the changes in town. But eventually the conversation drifted back to where it needed to go. I read about your buildings, he said. I kept the articles. I know, I replied. He looked surprised. The letter told me. He nodded slowly. I was proud of you. That sentence hit me harder than anything else that day, because even during the years when we hadn't spoken, he had still been watching, still cheering quietly from a distance, still believing in me. I should have come back sooner, I said. He shook his head. No. Why not? Because you needed to live your life, he said. And you did. We sat there in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that no longer felt heavy. Then he looked at me again. You staying long? I thought about Chicago, about my apartment, about the life I had built there, and then I looked around at the street where everything started. I'm not sure yet, I said. He smiled gently. Well, he said, leaning back in his chair, however long you stay. His porch has been pretty lonely for 12 years. For the first time in a very long time. I laughed, and in that moment I realized something important. Life doesn't always give us perfect endings. Sometimes it gives us broken pieces, lost time, years that can never be returned, but every once in a while, life also gives us something rare, a second chance to say the words that waited too long. And that evening, sitting on that porch beside my father, I finally understood something that had taken 12 years to learn. Silence can last a long time, but love waits even longer.